Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, a podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Myslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. James Breakwell is a carnivore comedian. His Instagram bio reads, comedy writer, pig owner, father of 4 girls ages 10 and under, and exploding unicorn on Twitter. He's internet famous, but a real life nobody. His words. He's been a carnivore for over 2 years to help with body composition after struggling through years of diets, as well as resolving digestive issues. James is also the author of the forthcoming book, How to Be a Man, Whatever That Means, Lessons in Masculinity from a Questionable Source, which I've had a chance to preview and is absolutely hilarious and entertaining. His previous books include Only Dead on the Inside and Bare Minimum Parenting. Welcome to the show, James.
Thanks for having me. I am actually super excited to be here.
Great. Yeah, me too. And I was introduced through, I believe it was Sarah Kleiner, Carnivore Yogi, but had been following your comedy for a bit and also saw your interview on Kelly Hogan's podcast. So what made you decide to come out of the closet as a carnivore and talk about it a little bit more publicly?
It's something that it kept coming up on the periphery of all these other interviews I do. Because it's just kind of such an outstanding thing. It affects your life in all sorts of weird ways. So it kept coming up. And I follow all these carnivores and all these keto people on Instagram. And I finally thought, you know what? Why don't I, rather than going just on these parenting podcasts, why don't I reach out to these carnivore people who don't even know I exist? Because they are my people and they don't even know it yet. So I've made the changes that you and others have recommended, and it's greatly changed and affected my life. And I thought, you know what? Why don't I throw my hat in the ring and say, hey, it made a difference for me too, and maybe that'll help other people make the switch.
Yeah, that's awesome. And you're quite welcome. Appreciate you doing that. And so backing up a bit, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your health journey. You know, how did you get quote unquote sick in the first place? And, what diets had you tried over the years?
Well, when I was real young, I had just an invincible metabolism. I could eat half a tray of brownies in high school and just not gain weight. I was a cross country runner and track runner, but the number of calories burned running would not explain the thousands of calories I ate. And I ran cross country and track up through college. And at some point in college, with that all you can eat buffet and then the addition of alcohol, just like abruptly overnight one time, my metabolism just finally stopped. And after that point, I found that I could lose weight, but in order to do it, I just had to severely calorie restrict. And the first time I did it was the worst because I was never a great runner, but I was pretty good in the weight room. I was bigger than the other runners and slower. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be slower anyway, I'm going to get stronger than them. And I bulked up and I spent 4 years in college building up all this unnecessary muscle that didn't help me at all in running, but made me look good. And then I realized I was getting fat and it was just a lot of weight to carry around. I had love handles for the first time in my life. I was like, I'm going to lose that. And I just drastically cut my calories and I lost so much weight so fast. I lost every bit of muscle I had built up. It was the dumbest thing I could have possibly done. And after that, in the years after college, I didn't really work out much. I didn't run. I only ran sparingly here and there, a couple races a year. And I kind of got into a pattern where I would just gradually gain weight. I just couldn't control myself at all around carbohydrates and sugar. Not that I understood I needed to. Back then, I just thought, food is food. And I would gain a bunch of weight. And then eventually, I was married right after college. And I kind of got in this pattern where every time I knew baby pictures were coming up because my wife was pregnant, she would get sick. She couldn't tolerate the smell of food. And I was like, all right, we're not going to be cooking anyway. This is a good time to lose weight. So I'd lose a bunch of weight, look really good in baby photos, and then I'd immediately gain all the weight back. And I did that. So our kids were spaced out about every 2 years, but every 2 years I gained back all the weight. It was a pretty stupid system for me. And then I read Good Calories, Bad Calories. I can't remember the name of the author. I guess it was an audiobook.
Gary Taubes.
Gary Taubes. So some people don't consider that reading. And after that, I kind of went down the rabbit hole about, it's just the demographic science. It just seems so clear cut of here are all the problems that carbohydrates and sugar are causing. And it was like, holy cow, like I've got all these, this seems so clear cut. I don't want these long-term health problems. So I went down that rabbit hole, read a bunch more books, looked up a bunch of stuff online, and I finally just switched myself to keto, and nobody else in my family was. I was doing all the cooking anyway. So I was like, I'm just going to cook for myself and do this. And at that point, I happened to be on one of my down cycles where I had already lost the weight, but for the first time ever, the weight didn't come back. I was full. I was eating like 2 pounds of chicken and a pound of broccoli every day. And I did that for about 9 months. And as I was doing that, I realized that as I studied more, it's like, okay, so first of all, chicken isn't as good as beef. Beef has way more to it than that. And second, why am I wasting my time with these vegetables? I just cover them with vegetable oil anyway. I'm just looking to fill up my stomach. Why don't I just fill that up with a third pound of meat? And so that's when I made the switch to carnivore, and I never looked back. I got leaner than before. I got stronger than before. I was fuller than before. And it was definitely the right call for me.
That's awesome. And I can relate so much to your story. I was a chronic rower in high school and college, and similarly felt like I could eat the world and not gain weight. 5'10", 148 pounds. But yeah, similarly, my metabolism slowed down, and had to make some shifts, and that's how I happened upon carnivore as well. I'm interested. Where were you getting, like, you mentioned Taubes and some other books, but where were you getting like information on carnivore? And did you feel like you were completely going against the mainstream? Like, how did those around you, your wife, friends, react?
My wife didn't care at all, as with most of what I do. I think she figured it would be a fad, and I think she's a little surprised that I've stuck with it as long as I have. But I also I look the best I've ever looked in my life. So actually, she started to come around. I've just recently started, for the rest of the family, it's like, okay, I've taken care of my health. Maybe I should take care of your health. So I've been slowly phasing out sugar and phasing in more meat. And she's going along with that. But as for the rest of my family, like my parents and everybody like that, my brothers and siblings, they're all convinced I'm going to die. And it's like, guys, come on here. So I got up, so I'm 6'2". And at one point at my fattest, I got up to like 204. I was horribly out of shape. I was breathing hard going upstairs. I couldn't run or do anything else. I didn't have any muscle. I had 2 chins, and nobody was worried at all about my health. And now for the first time, I'm 6'2", and like today I weighed in at like 168. I've got a 6-pack for the first time in my life. I go to the gym 2 hours a day, and I try to make it 6 days a week, but usually it's closer to 5.
Wow.
I've never been this strong before. And now suddenly they think I'm going to die. And it's like, it's not what the thing that really blows my mind is, like, it took care of all my digestive issues. I had major, they developed later in life. I had to just take tons and tons and tons of fiber. And it was a bad situation. And it turns out that the opposite was actually better for me. When I got rid of fiber altogether, it fixed that problem. And so I cleared up my digestive issues. I cleared up my weight. I'm athletically doing better than before. I'm actually an athlete again, rather than being just a guy who sits around on the couch all day. And now is when they're concerned. It's like, I think you've placed your concern in the wrong spot. Before is when you should have been worried. But I haven't managed to convince any of them. One of my brothers is really big into weightlifting, and he still does the bulk and cut and all of that. It's like, you can make your life so much easier if you just eat meat. You won't bloat up. You can just gain weight, gradually actually gain muscle. I mean, look at me. I've caught up to you. He's been working out for 10 years and I've been working out for 2, and I've pretty much caught up to him.
Wow.
And he still won't do it. Like, nobody will make the switch. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him go carnivore. That's kind of what I've discovered.
Yeah, so true. And I think all you can do at the end of the day, especially for those close to you, is just be the example. Until they can't stop asking.
If I drop dead from this, I will never hear the end of it. I have to outlive them all now.
Too true. And I heard you mention on Kelly's podcast, and you mentioned it just now, like your enthusiasm for fitness and weightlifting. And you mentioned you watch a lot of like bodybuilder content, or you hear about it. How do you explain the cognitive dissonance between, like, obviously your own results speak for themselves, but between like how there's so much lore around needing to do these bulks and cuts and the need for carbohydrates and all those things versus, you having the best body composition of your life on carnivore?
In the fitness especially, everybody has an opinion and they're convinced it's backed by science and they're convinced it's right. You go on YouTube and there's a trillion different ideas. And so I kind of just follow different influencers and pick and choose. Like, for example, one thing I kind of discovered is, carnivore is great for me. And I can eat way more meat and protein than I could if I was eating carbohydrates. If I was eating carbohydrates to look like this, I'd have to be eating less than 2,000 calories. And now I eat 3 pounds of meat. And at 3 pounds of meat, I'm actually gradually trending downwards in my weight. At the same time, early on, some of the bodybuilding people who are carnivores are like, you can eat as much as you want. And I tried that, and it was absolutely not the case. So there is a limit to quantity. I was eating 5 pounds of meat for a while, which was a chore because I do OMAD.
Wow.
So imagine fitting 5 pounds of ground beef in your stomach at once.
Yeah, geez.
Sometimes with cheese on the top. And I still upwards as I did it. So as far as like what works and what doesn't in the bodybuilding community. So first of all, I don't think the bodybuilders would ever accept me. I mean, I'm still, I don't think I have the bulk to ever fit in with them. I still, when you look at me, I very much look like a runner. I just look like a runner who works out. But yeah, there's a lot of different things. Like Greg Doucette's the one I like, who talks about not bulking and cutting. He talks about just gain weight gradually over time. But at the same time, he flips around and, I have so much respect for him. He knows so much. But then I was watching his video the other day from what I eat in 24 hours. And like his whole day is just a struggle for food and talking about being hungry and doing he's just like constantly scavenging for all these different things. And he makes it so complicated. And I look and I spend 10 minutes a day cooking for myself and I make one big pile of meat and I get results from it. And I just think people are making their lives harder than it needs to be. Now, there's one thing I'm going back and forth on. I haven't tried it the other way. So I really prefer doing one meal a day because that way I know exactly how much I'm eating. I know when I'm eating. It's super easy to adjust. Let's add more food. Let's add less food. It eliminates all the variables and it's easier for me. I don't need to worry about snacking or anything because I know once a day I'm going to feast. Now I've heard again and again and again based on science that if you really want to grow, you're supposed to get protein throughout the day, eat a bunch of small meals. And I think if I did that, I think I would just be perpetually hungry and irritated. I couldn't get all the way full, but I have heard that's the best way. So I guess under one meal a day, I'm kind of on their intermittent fasting track. Maybe someday I'll try the around the clock, just eat a bunch of small protein meals, but I haven't taken the plunge yet just because the one meal a day has been so beneficial for me so far.
This episode is brought to you by Element Electrolytes. We know that salt, potassium, and magnesium are essential minerals, especially for those on carnivore, keto, and low-carb diets to relieve hunger, dizziness, cramps, headaches, and keep so many of your bodily processes running optimally, including sleep, brain and mental health, hormonal health, your heart, immunity, and more. Element electrolytes are convenient, evidence-based, and delicious. My wife and I have been using Element for years, every single day. They're great for fueling hard workouts, getting adapted and beating keto flu, fasting, traveling with them, and kickstarting your day with energy. They're used by Navy SEALs, Olympic weightlifters, jiu-jitsu athletes, and everyday people who want to make themselves better, like you and me. They're also founded by superhero Rob Wolf. LMNT is offering free, that's right, free people, Element sample packs to Carnivore Cast listeners. All you have to do is pay for shipping. Go to drinklmnt.com/carnivorecast to claim this awesome deal. That's drinklmnt.com/carnivorecast, one word, and I'll include a link in the show notes.
Yeah, I love the simplicity of it. That makes a lot of sense. And one, I forget where I read it, but it talked about in a mixed meal. So not even carnivore where it's like just fat and protein, so digests even slower, but just like a typical standard American diet mixed meal, it takes an hour per 10 grams of protein to digest. So you can imagine if you're eating OMAD, 3 pounds of meat a day, that's like, 300 grams of protein. You're theoretically stimulating muscle protein synthesis for much longer.
In theory, I'd like to believe that. So one of the switches I made early on working out. So again, when I lifted in college, I got results, but I was lifting like a runner, and that's the instructions we got. So then I just, did research on the line. Thought, I want to actually build muscle and not look as lean as I've been my whole life. As I did that, it was kind of an interesting transition. I actually forgot where I was going with that point. But all right, I'll just drop that train of thought. I'm sorry.
No worries.
We got talking about the 3 pounds of meat. My meal's coming up, and all of a sudden my mind is all on the food. But I will defer to your next question.
No worries. So I was curious. You mentioned ground beef. How did you find your way to that? Like, have you tried other types of carnivore foods, and that's just what you feel best on, or what makes that work for you?
So I switched from chicken to beef just based on the macronutrients and the calories and the fat and all of that. And at first I did the half a cow thing. I think I've done a half a cow 3 times. And a half a cow was great because you get a bunch of steak. But I found that steak, it just takes a long time to eat, especially back when I was eating 5 pounds of beef a day. You know how long it takes to eat 5 pounds of steak? By the time you get to the last one, the first one is cold and it's so much chewing. And those burgers, man, they're like Jell-O. They just go down so fast. So that was kind of why I made the switch. And I think nutritionally, there's really not that much difference between steak and ground beef. I mean, ground beef is just ground up steak, essentially. It's just not as juicy of a cut or however they break it up. So I ended up, I found I could get ground beef pretty cheap and buy in bulk from the grocery store. Just whenever they go on sale, I get it for like $1.99 a pound for 80-20. So that's what I'm doing now. And I think what I'm going to do is integrate more eggs as well. I've been reading a lot about that. And so I lose a lot of the calories from the ground beef just when I cook it out because there's still the grease in the pan, all that fat is there.
Yeah, you don't eat the tallow?
I don't. I don't have any way to do it besides like drinking it. When you cook them into patties, like the tallow's just there and it's in a liquid form, and drinking it seems kind of gross. But I have before taken like a bunch of eggs and put it in there. And I think I'm going to go back to that, just gradually start adding eggs and see how that affects my body composition as I go along.
Yeah. So it's funny. I have a bit of an anecdote to share. So when I started carnivore, there weren't all these resources out there about how to do it well. There was the Zeroing In on Health Facebook group, but that was kind of small. And, there wasn't like a beginner's guide. They were kind of just giving the advice, like eat the meat you enjoy till you're full, stop. But I basically did a lot of things wrong. And one of the things I did wrong is I was eating ground beef like you were in very large quantities. But I wanted to make sure I was getting enough fat. So I would save the tallow. I would cook all my food the night before and bring it into work. I just put the tallow in the Tupperware, and it would basically be like this really rich, creamy, cool tallow. It tasted like ice cream. It was delicious, especially when you put salt on it. But I learned very quickly that when you eat that much rendered fat or liquid fat, you can get really sick. Either it gives you like disaster pants, or makes you super bloated, and you actually can't pass any food, which is what happened to me. I was just getting so full and so bloated, and like my stomach just kept expanding and expanding. So you do have to be careful with that. I think that's the one downside I would say to ground beef versus steaks is steaks, you can very easily like preserve more of the fat and eat it off the steak, versus ground beef. If you're cooking it anything more than like completely rare, you're losing a lot of the fat.
That is a very good point. Actually, I was listening to the carb addiction doctor today on YouTube, and he goes on and on. They talking about the disadvantages of too much protein and not enough fat. So I don't know where the proper balance is on that. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm never going to look, like an Olympic bodybuilder. I just look like a guy who looks decent with his shirt off now, which was kind of my ultimate aspiration in life. I just want to not be embarrassed when I take off my shirt. When I run, I'm a very sweaty guy. I hate running in shirts, and so. If I can just not cause humiliation to my family and those around me, that would be great.
Well, it sounds like it's working very well for you, James, as a father of 4 and your comedy career. You seem to have it figured out pretty well. And I want to ask a bit about the comedy. Where did that start for you? I actually haven't looked a lot into your bio. When did you start writing comically, and how did you get into it? How did you develop the skill for it?
So I started way back when I was 16 in a computer literacy class in high school. We were learning how to use Microsoft Word, which does not take a lot of teaching. I mean, a monkey can use that program. I mean, it's proof I can use it. So we had a lot of downtime at the end of class. And like any normal student, I used my downtime to start writing a fake book of the Bible. And I emailed it to a couple of my classmates, and I watched them open it, and I watched them laugh, and I was hooked. I mean, it's just like an addictive drug, that dopamine hit. And I was like, man, I could, I really I'm not a stand-up comic. I'm not necessarily that funny in person, but in writing, I can get it all out there. So I started going down that route. I decided I wanted to be the next Dave Barry. So I went to college. I majored in English creative writing. And I was going to go into journalism, which I did. I got into newspapers and figured I'd work my way up and get a column. I was in newspapers for all of a year and I bailed. I mean, I got into newspapers at the worst possible time. I don't know if you've heard of this thing called the internet, but yeah, it was around and newspapers weren't doing great. And on top of that, I just really didn't like the job. It was just a lot of covering angry people at meetings and things like that. And actually, that's the funny story I end the book with, kind of how I nuked my journalism career in one fell swoop. But I got out of that and I started a blog instead, and then just got a different unrelated job, completely separate from writing. I spent 10 years, writing just tons and tons of comedy articles in this blog and not getting any traction. And finally, I joined Twitter to promote the blog. And that's where I took off, because Twitter gives you instant feedback as opposed to a blog. You can write a 1,000-word article and you'll get like 2 comments. One's like, haha, that's great. And the other one's like, this is stupid, delete your blog. And that's not really helpful. But, on Twitter, when you write, it's you get instant feedback. If people like it, they hit the like button and they share it, and it spreads further. And if they don't like it, they ignore it, and it kind of recedes in shame and obscurity, as all bad jokes should. And from that instant feedback, I figured out that what people really liked were jokes about my kids, especially conversation ones, just kind of quick back and forth dialogues. And so I zeroed in on that formula. I practiced it over and over again. I built my Twitter account up to about 200,000 followers. And then BuzzFeed ran an article on me with links back to my Twitter account, and it exploded. Like, so after I'd been, I'd been at, I looked like an overnight success, but I've been at this for like over a decade. When all of a sudden, my mid-sized Twitter account just exploded up to a million followers thanks to BuzzFeed. And within a couple of months of that, I had an agent and a book deal, and I've been writing books ever since.
That's really cool. I didn't realize that. That makes so much sense when you say it about the instant feedback of Twitter. That makes so much sense for a comedy writer or writers in general to be able to do that and like run experiments.
It's like a free writing workshop. I mean, you just gotta have a thick skin. You just gotta look at the numbers. I recommend not reading the comments, but yeah, the likes and retweets, super valuable data.
Yeah, and your latest book, can you talk a little bit about it? Like, what are the stories about? What was the style of the book?
So this book is a little different than my other books. My other books were all kind of funny parenting guides: how to parent in the zombie apocalypse, how to parent while doing as little as possible, how to protect your child from time travel and sharks and all sorts of other ridiculous scenarios. But this one it's more focused on me. So the title of this one is How to Be a Man, Whatever That Means, Lessons in Modern Masculinity from a Questionable Source. And I wanted to go back to the funny stories I'd built up over the course of my life that weren't necessarily about my kids and that have predominantly come from before I was on social media. And the theme that tied it all together is what does it mean to be a man? There's just this big open question right now in society about what is masculinity. And mostly we define masculinity by what it's not. I mean, the overall theme is that there's no wrong way to be a woman, but there's like every possible wrong way to be a man. I mean, there have been entire advertising campaigns based on the wrong way to be a man. But on the flip side of it, what's the right way to be a man? So I wanted to take a look at that and see what lessons about masculinity I could take from the funny stories in my own life. And so that's the thread that ties them all together. And the stories range from everything from, lawn gnome heists in college to, running away at the age of 3 to, as I mentioned a minute ago, nuking my journalism career. It's just kind of all in there. And it shows the lessons that I learned or definitely should have learned but failed to learn. And that's a big part of manhood as well.
Yeah, I love it. It reads really well. It's entertaining. There's little nuggets of wisdom in there. It's really great. I haven't read a lot of written comedy, compared to the amount of like stand up or movies I watch or TV shows. But yeah, I found myself laughing out loud a lot.
That is awesome. It's crazy because if you're a stand-up comedian, you hear laughter all the time. And what I do is I never hear laughter. I send it out, and like on Twitter, I basically get a grade back. And so it's the most unnerving thing when I'll be walking by somebody reading one of my books and I'll hear them laugh. I'm like, oh, that's right. That's the end of this process. People actually make a sound.
There it is. And James, I know you haven't done any comedy yet on carnivore diets, but any plans in the future?
I have not. I think that non-carnivores think carnivore itself is a joke, and it always surprises me. Like I follow a lot of Instagram accounts about in the carnivore space. They're a great resource. They have links to videos and articles and studies and all of that. And every once in a while, I'll click on the comments. I never read the comments on my own stuff. That's a disaster. But I read the comments on other people's stuff. And vegans will just swoop in and they hijack the hashtags. And they're just like, who are you trying to convince, guys? If you're happy with veganism, go be vegan. Go do that on its own. So I think that that battle right there presents its own comedy. Maybe there's a healthy way to do the vegan diet, but it seems like in general, it's a not very happy crowd. So I don't know that there's a ton of comedy there besides the farce that's already playing out.
Yeah. It's good to be able to laugh at it and not get too emotional about it. A lot of people do. And, yes. I try to think that just in any group, there's going to be 1% of people who are absolutely insane. And that's probably the percent of vegans we see most often.
Yeah. And ultimately, if your diet's working for you, I mean, great, go do that. We're not going to like take away your vegetables. I don't know what they think is going to happen. I guess they must feel threatened by these people switching over and eating meat. But it's frustrating because you can say, hey, look at what I did. Look at the changes I made. And for the first time in my life, I'm in great shape and I'm not hungry and I have all these benefits. And people are like, yeah, that's nice. I'm going to go do this diet that fails all the time and then wonder why I'm gaining weight back. And it's like, I wonder why that is.
Yeah, too true. Well, James, this has been fantastic. Really appreciate you coming on, sharing your story. Where can folks find out more about you? And I'll, of course, have links to everything in the show notes.
Again, that book is How to Be a Man, Whatever That Means, Lessons in Modern Masculinity from a Questionable Source. It will be out in no time at all, actually. I actually signed a batch of books today that's actually getting mailed out tomorrow. So if you pre-order that, it should show up right away. You can find me at my website, explodingunicorn.com. That's got links to all my stuff. And I'm best known for my Twitter handle at Exploding Unicorn. That's Exploding Unicorn without the E. And if you just search for James Breakwell on pretty much any other platform, I should pop up.
Great. Well, yeah, encourage folks to check that out, and I'll have links to all of that. Thanks again for your time, James.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on here.
My pleasure.
If you enjoy the show, please consider supporting the Carnivore Cast on Patreon. By becoming a patron, you'll help us reach more people and continue to create content on carnivore. There are also exclusive perks available, such as private Q&As, consultations with me, and more. Become a supporter at patreon.com/carnivorecast. Check the episode description for the link. Thank you, and I'll see you there. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered, or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Carnivore Cast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.